It was late at night when the city finally began to quiet down. The busy streets that had been filled with noise and movement just hours earlier now felt almost abandoned. Storefronts were closed, metal shutters pulled tight, their surfaces reflecting the dim glow of streetlights. The pavement was still damp from a recent rain, catching small reflections of passing headlights and neon signs in the distance. A young man walked alone down the sidewalk. His steps were slow, not because he was injured, but because exhaustion had settled deep into his body. His clothes were worn and stained from a long day of physical labor. The fabric of his shirt clung to him slightly, darkened with sweat and dirt. In one hand, he carried a small, frayed bag, everything he owned for the day packed inside it. He didn't look angry. He didn't look bitter. He just looked tired. This was his routine most nights: work until his hands ached, walk home through streets that barely noticed him, and hope tomorrow would be a little easier than today. He kept his eyes forward, focused on the cracked pavement ahead, lost in his thoughts. He was counting in his head. Rent, food, bus fare. The numbers never seemed to work out. As he passed one closed shop after another, a sudden movement caught his attention. An elderly man stood near the entrance of a shuttered storefront, his posture tense, his face tight with worry. He patted his jacket pockets again and again, then checked his trousers, then his coat once more. Each motion grew faster, more frantic, as realization set in. Something was wrong. The young man slowed his pace. The old man's hands trembled slightly as he looked down at the ground, then around the empty street, as if hoping someone might appear with an answer. His expression carried a mix of confusion and fear, the kind that comes when you realize you've lost something important, something you may not be able to replace. The street was quiet enough that the young man could hear the old man sigh under his breath. For a brief moment, he hesitated. He was tired. He had his own problems. He had places to be, even if none of them felt like home. But something about the old man's panic made it impossible to keep walking. The young man stopped a few steps away, watching silently. He noticed the man's neat coat, his polished shoes, the sharp contrast between his appearance and the lonely street around him. This wasn't someone used to being stranded like this. The air between them felt heavy, filled with unanswered questions. Neither of them spoke yet. The city lights flickered softly above, unaware that this quiet street was about to become the starting point of a moment neither man would ever forget. And though neither realized it at the time, what was about to happen next would change both of their lives forever. The old man finally spoke, his voice low and strained. "I had it just a moment ago," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. He checked his coat pocket again, slower this time, as if hoping the result might somehow change. When his hand came up empty, his shoulders sagged slightly. He stood there, staring at the metal shutter in front of him, breathing shallowly. The young man took a step closer. "Sir," he said carefully, not wanting to startle him, "are you looking for something?" The old man looked up, surprised, as though he hadn't noticed anyone else on the street. His eyes widened for a brief second before settling into a tired expression. "My wallet," he replied. "I'm sure I had it when I left the restaurant." He shook his head slowly, frustration creeping into his voice. Inside that wallet were his identification, his bank cards, and more importantly, his sense of control. Losing it felt like losing his footing in a world that already moved too fast. The street around them remained empty. No cars passed. No pedestrians slowed down. The city offered no help. "I don't understand," the old man said. "I never misplace things." His hands trembled again as he retraced his steps mentally. He pointed vaguely down the sidewalk, then toward the corner. Each gesture carried uncertainty. The young man listened quietly. He noticed how the old man avoided meeting his eyes, embarrassed by the situation. People like him weren't used to needing help from strangers. The young man recognized that feeling well. "Let's look around," he offered. The old man hesitated for a moment, then nodded. They moved slowly along the sidewalk, scanning the ground under the streetlights. The young man crouched occasionally, checking near the curb, along the edges of the closed storefronts, places where a wallet might have slipped unnoticed. The old man followed a few steps behind, his breathing uneven. What if someone took it? He asked suddenly. The question hung in the air. The young man didn't answer right away. He knew that fear. When you lose something important, your mind always goes to the worst possibility. We don't know that yet, he said calmly. Let's keep looking. They reached the corner where trash bags were piled near a darkened alley. The old man stopped walking, his expression tightening. I was here earlier, he said quietly. I remember stopping right here. The young man nodded and stepped closer to the bags, scanning the wet pavement carefully. The streetlight flickered overhead, casting uneven shadows along the wall. Neither of them noticed it yet. But somewhere nearby, lying just out of sight, was the wallet that would soon test the young man's character and change everything that followed. The young man stepped closer to the wall, his eyes moving slowly across the ground. The pavement near the alley was uneven, scattered with small puddles left behind by the rain. Trash bags were stacked carelessly against the brick wall, some torn, their contents spilling slightly onto the sidewalk. The smell of damp cardboard and old food hung faintly in the air. He crouched down, brushing aside a flattened paper cup with his hand. That was when he saw it. Partially hidden beneath the edge of a trash bag, something dark and rectangular caught the reflection of the streetlight. At first, he wasn't sure what it was. He leaned closer, reaching out carefully. It was a wallet. Worn leather, slightly scuffed at the corners, damp from the rain. For a moment, he just stared at it. Behind him, the old man stood frozen, watching silently, his breath caught in his throat as the young man picked it up. That looks like mine, the old man said, his voice barely above a whisper. The young man turned and held it out, giving the old man a clear look. The relief on the old man's face was immediate, but it was mixed with disbelief, as if he didn't trust the moment to be real yet. Yes, he said quickly, that's it, that's my wallet. The young man nodded, but he didn't hand it over right away. Not because he hesitated to return it, but because something else demanded his attention first. He opened the wallet just enough to check for identification. Inside were neatly arranged cards, a driver's license, and folded bills, more money than the young man usually held in his hands at any one time. Enough to pay rent, enough to buy groceries for weeks, enough to make his problems disappear, at least for a while. The realization hit him all at once. The street felt suddenly quieter. The old man watched closely, his eyes fixed on the wallet in the young man's hands. He didn't accuse, he didn't rush him, he simply waited, uncertainty written across his face. The young man felt the weight of the wallet, not just in his hand, but in his chest. He thought about the long hours of work, the calculations that never added up, the constant pressure of survival. No one would know if he kept it. The street was empty, the night offered cover. For a brief moment, the decision existed. Then the young man closed the wallet. He looked up and met the old man's eyes. I think this belongs to you, he said. The old man exhaled sharply, a sound caught somewhere between relief and gratitude. But the real test wasn't over yet. Because what the young man had just done, choosing honesty when no one was watching, was about to open a door neither of them expected. And the night was far from finished. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. The young man still held the wallet in his hand, feeling the firmness of the leather, the weight of what was inside. It was a small object, but at that moment, it carried more meaning than anything else he owned. The old man stood quietly in front of him. He didn't reach for the wallet. He didn't rush him. He simply waited. That silence made the moment heavier. The young man glanced down at the ground, then back at the wallet. His fingers tightened slightly around it, not out of greed, but out of habit, an instinct formed by years of having too little. He had learned to count every dollar, to think twice before letting anything go. He took a slow breath. I just wanted to make sure, he said calmly, opening the wallet again and pulling out the identification. He read the name aloud, confirming what they both already knew. The old man nodded. That's me. His voice was steady, but his eyes revealed exhaustion. Losing the wallet hadn't just been inconvenient, it had shaken him. In a city full of strangers, it reminded him how vulnerable anyone could become, no matter their age or status. The young man slid the ID back into place. For a brief moment, his thoughts drifted. He imagined what that money could fix. Overdue bills, a few nights of proper rest, the pressure that followed him every day like a shadow. No one else was around. No one was watching. There would be no consequences. Or so it seemed. Then he looked at the old man again. He saw the relief mixed with uncertainty. The quiet hope that this stranger would do the right thing. The kind of hope people rarely allowed themselves to feel anymore. The young man extended his hand. "Here," he said simply, offering the wallet. The old man took it slowly, almost carefully, as if afraid it might disappear again. When his fingers closed around it, his shoulders relaxed for the first time that night. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft but sincere. "You don't know how much this means." The young man shrugged lightly. Anyone would have done the same. But they both knew that wasn't true. The old man looked at him more closely now, noticing the worn clothes, the tired eyes, the quiet dignity in his posture. "Please," he said after a pause, "let me at least buy you a coffee. It's the least I can do." The young man hesitated. He hadn't planned on staying. He hadn't planned on conversation. But something about the way the old man spoke, without pity, without obligation, made it hard to refuse. "All right," he replied finally. They turned and began walking down the street together, side by side, their footsteps echoing softly in the night. Neither of them realized it yet, but this small decision, to return a wallet, to accept a simple invitation, was already setting something much larger into motion. And the night still had more to reveal. They walked together in silence for a short while. The street remained quiet, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the soft echo of their footsteps. The young man kept his hands in his pockets, his shoulders still slightly tense, as if his body hadn't yet adjusted to the choice he had just made. The old man walked beside him, holding the wallet firmly in his coat pocket now, occasionally touching it as if to reassure himself it was still there. "I can't thank you enough," the old man said after a moment. "People don't usually stop anymore." The young man gave a small nod. "I know." They reached a small cafe near the corner, one of the few places still open at that hour. Warm light spilled out through the windows, creating a sharp contrast with the cold, dim street behind them. Inside, only a handful of tables were occupied. They took seats near the window. The old man ordered coffee for both of them without hesitation. There was no awkwardness in the gesture, no sense of charity, just a simple act of appreciation. As they waited, the old man studied the young man more closely. "You could have kept it," he said quietly. The young man didn't look up right away. He had thought about that question already, more than once. "Yes," he replied honestly, "I could have." The old man nodded slowly. "Most people would have." The young man finally met his eyes. "I didn't help you because I expected anything. It just didn't feel right not to." The coffee arrived, steam rising gently from the cups. For a moment, they both focused on the simple comfort of the warmth. The old man took a sip, then leaned back slightly. "I've spent most of my life believing I understood people," he said. "Tonight reminded me that I still have a lot to learn." The young man listened without interrupting. "There was a time," the old man continued, "when I measured trust in contracts and numbers. But none of that helped me when I thought I'd lost everything important on that street." He paused, then added, "You gave it back without knowing who I was." The young man shrugged again. "I didn't need to know." That answer lingered between them. The old man smiled faintly. Not out of amusement, but recognition. He saw something rare: integrity without performance, honesty without expectation. When they finished their coffee, the old man reached into his coat pocket again. Not for money this time, but for a business card. "Take this," he said, sliding it across the table. "If you ever need anything, call me." The young man hesitated, then accepted it politely. He glanced at the name, but didn't react. "Thank you," he said. "I appreciate it." They stood and headed back toward the door. Outside, the night air felt lighter than before. The wallet was back where it belonged. The money was untouched. But something far more valuable had already changed hands. And neither of them yet understood just how significant that exchange would become. They didn't leave right away. After stepping outside, the old man paused near the cafe entrance. Glancing back through the window, the street was still quiet, but the tension from earlier had faded. What remained was something neither of them had expected, a sense of connection. "Would you mind walking with me for a bit?" the old man asked. "I'm not quite ready to be alone just yet." The young man considered the request, then nodded. They walked slowly, following the sidewalk toward a quieter residential block. The lights from apartment windows glowed softly above, and the sound of the city felt distant now, muted. "I don't usually talk to strangers," the old man said after a moment, "but tonight feels different." The young man listened, hands still in his pockets. His posture relaxed now. "When I lost my wallet," the old man continued, "it wasn't just about the money. It was the realization that I could disappear out here, and no one would notice." He glanced at the young man. "You noticed?" The young man looked ahead. "I've been invisible before." That simple statement carried weight. They walked in silence again, each processing the words. The old man's steps slowed slightly, his breathing steadier than it had been earlier. "You work hard," the old man said, observing the condition of the young man's hands. "I can tell." "Yes," the young man replied, "I do what I can." There was no complaint in his voice, no bitterness, just truth. "I used to believe that effort always led somewhere," the old man said quietly. "That if you did the right things, life would eventually reward you." He paused. "But sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes it does. In unexpected ways." The young man didn't respond, but he understood what was being said. They reached a small park. Empty at that hour. Benches lined the path, damp from the rain. They stopped beneath a street lamp, its light casting a soft circle around them. "I want you to know," the old man said, turning to face him fully, "that what you did tonight mattered." The young man met his gaze. "I didn't do it for that reason." "I know," the old man replied. "That's why it mattered." The words settled between them. They stood there for a moment longer before the old man straightened his coat. "I should be heading home." The young man nodded. "So should I." They exchanged a final look, one of quiet understanding, not obligation. As they parted ways, both carried something new with them. For the young man, it was the reassurance that doing the right thing still meant something. For the old man, it was the return of a belief he thought he had lost. And this conversation, simple as it was, would soon lead to a revelation neither of them saw coming. They parted at the edge of the park, but the night wasn't finished with either of them. The young man continued walking toward his small apartment, the quiet streets stretching ahead. His mind replayed the events of the evening, the lost wallet, the conversation, the old man's words. It all felt simple on the surface, yet heavier the more he thought about it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the business card. He hadn't looked at it closely before. Under the streetlight, he read the name again, then the title beneath it. His steps slowed. The name meant nothing to him, but the company did. It was one he had seen before, on billboards, in news articles, mentioned by coworkers who spoke about it with a mix of respect and distance. The realization made him pause. He shook his head slightly and slipped the card back into his pocket. "It doesn't matter," he told himself. "He's just a man who lost his wallet." Across town, the old man sat in the back seat of a car that had arrived quietly to pick him up. The driver didn't ask questions. He simply drove. The old man leaned back, staring out the window as the city lights passed by. His fingers rested on the wallet again, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He hadn't planned on revealing anything tonight. In fact, he rarely spoke about his past at all. Years ago, he had built a life defined by responsibility and decisions that affected thousands of people. He had negotiated deals, signed contracts, and learned to read intention behind words. Over time, that world had hardened him. Trust became cautious, kindness became conditional. But none of that mattered when he stood alone on that street. What stayed with him now wasn't fear, it was the look on the young man's face when he returned the wallet. No hesitation, no performance, just a quiet certainty about what was right. The car stopped in front of a well-maintained building. As the driver opened the door, the old man hesitated before stepping out. "Tomorrow," he said suddenly. The driver looked at him through the mirror. "Sir?" I want you to find that young man. The old man continued, not to repay him, not with money. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I want to understand him. The driver nodded. Inside his apartment, the young man sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the ceiling. The city hummed faintly outside his window. He thought about the old man, his calm voice, his tired eyes, the way he listened. He didn't know why, but something told him this wasn't the end of their encounter. Somewhere between gratitude and curiosity, a connection had been formed. And soon, truths that had remained hidden for years were about to surface, reshaping not just their understanding of each other, but the direction of both their lives. The next morning began like any other for the young man. He woke before sunrise, the faint light filtering through the thin curtains of his apartment. The room was quiet, modest, and unchanged. He dressed quickly, ate a simple breakfast, and prepared for another long day of work. But his mind wasn't fully present. As he walked toward the bus stop, his hand brushed against the business card still tucked in his pocket. He hadn't planned to use it. In fact, he had told himself he wouldn't. It felt wrong to expect anything more from a moment that had already passed. Across the city, the old man sat at his desk, reviewing documents he had looked at 100 times before. Yet his attention kept drifting. Numbers blurred, words lost meaning. Finally, he pushed the papers aside. Call him, he said to the assistant standing nearby. The assistant hesitated. Are you sure, sir? Yes, the old man replied. I want to meet him again. Properly. A few hours later, the young man's phone vibrated in his pocket as he took a short break outside the building where he worked. He stared at the unfamiliar number for a moment before answering. Hello? Good afternoon, a calm voice said. This is the gentleman you helped last night. The young man straightened instinctively. Yes, sir. I hope I'm not interrupting. The old man continued. I wanted to thank you again, and ask if you would be willing to meet with me today. There was a pause. The young man hesitated, glancing back toward the building. Time meant money. Missing work wasn't a small decision. I don't usually have much free time, he said honestly. I understand, the old man replied. I wouldn't ask if it weren't important. Something in his tone made the young man listen. They agreed to meet later that afternoon. When the young man arrived at the address he'd been given, he stopped at the entrance. Uncertain, the building was nothing like the places he was used to. Clean lines, quiet hallways, purposeful movement. Inside, the old man greeted him warmly. Just as he had the night before, no titles, no distance. I won't keep you long, the old man said once they sat down. I just want to offer you something. The young man listened carefully. I can't repay integrity, the old man continued, but I can create opportunity. He explained slowly, clearly, a position, training, a chance to step into a different future, not guaranteed, not effortless, but real. The young man felt the weight of the moment settle in. This wasn't charity. This wasn't luck. This was a door opening. I'll need to think about it, the young man said quietly. The old man nodded. Of course, the choice is yours. As the young man left the building, the city looked different somehow. Nothing had changed yet. But everything was about to. The young man didn't make a decision right away. That evening, he returned to his apartment and sat quietly at the small table near the window. The city lights flickered on outside, but inside the room, everything remained still. He replayed the old man's words in his mind, not searching for excitement, but for truth. Opportunity had been offered, but it came with uncertainty. He thought about the routine he knew well. Long hours, physical exhaustion, little progress. It was familiar, and familiarity felt safe, even when it wasn't enough. But something had shifted. The next day, he returned to work with a different awareness. He noticed how often effort went unseen, how easily people were replaced. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine another path, not an easy one, but one that demanded growth instead of endurance. By the end of the week, he made his choice. He called the number on the card. I'm willing to try, he said simply. The old man received the call in his office, listening without interrupting. When the young man finished speaking, he smiled faintly. That's all I needed to hear, he replied. Training began soon after. The young man found himself in unfamiliar spaces, quiet rooms, structured schedules, conversations that required focus rather than physical strength. At first, it was overwhelming. He made mistakes. He asked questions. He learned to slow down and think differently. The old man observed from a distance. He didn't interfere. He didn't protect. He didn't make things easier. What he did do was watch carefully. He noticed the same honesty that had appeared on the street that night. The same discipline. The same refusal to cut corners. Even when no one was looking. For the old man, something changed as well. He began spending more time mentoring, listening, and engaging with people he would have once overlooked. The young man had reminded him of a version of himself he hadn't seen in years, before success had hardened his expectations. Weeks passed. Progress wasn't dramatic, but it was steady. One afternoon, the young man stood by the window of the office where he now worked. Watching the city below, it looked different from up there, not distant, but connected. He wasn't finished. He wasn't comfortable. But he was moving forward. Elsewhere in the building, the old man reviewed reports. Then paused. He thought back to that quiet street. The rain-soaked pavement. The wallet beneath the trash bag. A single moment of honesty had changed two directions at once. Not through force. Not through reward. But through choice. And now, only one final step remained, one that would show just how far both of them had come. Several months later, the street where it all began looked the same. The storefronts were still there. The streetlights still cast the same yellow glow onto the pavement. People passed by without noticing anything unusual. But the two lives connected by that place had changed. The young man walked down the sidewalk with a steadier pace now. His posture was more confident. Not because his life had become easy, but because it had become purposeful. He still worked hard, but his effort now led somewhere. He paused near the same corner where the wallet had once been found. For a moment, he remembered who he had been that night, tired, uncertain, carrying more questions than answers. He hadn't known that choosing honesty would open a door he never expected. Across town, the old man stood in his office, looking out over the city. His reflection in the glass looked older than he remembered, but calmer. He had returned to a part of himself he thought was gone, the part that believed in people. Not just systems. Later that afternoon, they met again. Not as a benefactor and recipient. Not as a favor owed. But as two men shaped by the same moment. "You didn't change my life by returning a wallet," the old man said quietly. "You changed it by reminding me who I was before I stopped paying attention." The young man listened, then replied simply, "You didn't give me a chance. You trusted me with one." They stood in silence, watching the city move below. Neither of them believed in miracles. Neither believed in shortcuts. What they believed in now was choice. One small decision, made on a quiet street, had traveled farther than either of them could have imagined. It had changed habits, perspectives, and futures, not through force, but through integrity. As they parted, the young man headed toward his next responsibility, while the old man returned to his work with renewed clarity. The street remained unchanged. The night had passed. The wallet had long been forgotten. But the kindness hadn't. It lived on in every honest decision that followed. In every moment when doing the right thing mattered more than being seen. And that was the true ending of the story, not a reward. Not a coincidence, but a reminder. That even when no one is watching, what we choose to do can quietly shape a life. Sometimes, too,